For 45 years, I was a member of an Irish missionary congregation called St. Patrick's Missionary Society. And they put out a magazine 9 times a year called Africa. It had a circulation of about 180,000 copies, and it's still being produced. And I still get copies of it from them, so I received the April version just a few weeks ago. And they sometimes will take stuff from the archives, old articles that have been written many years ago. And for Easter, they've reproduced an article which I had written myself in April of 1976, 43 years ago. And it's actually really appropriate for our celebration of Alfred's life today. It's called Easter People. Looking back at it now, it must have been a peculiar sight. At the time, it seemed the most natural thing in the world. In a few days' time, we will have Holy Thursday night liturgy, and it will take on a new meaning for me. When I trace the figures on the Easter candle and say, Christ, the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega, I will remember it again, wistfully. It began when one of our Christians, Joel, came to the mission in tears and told me that his brother had died in the district hospital 5 miles away. He was a young man and had died very suddenly of bad malaria. I gave Joel some money to go to town and have a box made. We had finished an extension to the maternity hospital on the compound at the time, and I wanted to go to the town to buy some new beds for it. I bought the beds and the mattresses and tied them securely on the back of my pickup and was driving through the town when I met Joel again. He was carrying the newly made coffin on his head and walking towards the district hospital. So we went together. We put the body in the coffin and tied the coffin on the back of the pickup on top of the beds and the mattresses. Joel sat in the back to steady the load while we drove to his brother's home. As we journeyed, I began to reflect, within days, babies would be pushing their way into life on these beds, where now the body of a young Christian was lying, who had begun a new, awe-inspiring, never-to-end life, the beginning and the end. In the evening, his family gathered near the house and we buried him. A scrawny chicken scratched for food on the earth heap, knocking lumps of clay down into the grave. An old woman shushed it squawkingly away. I made this simple comparison on the mystery of death, no less true for being simply expressed and without theological sophistication. When a young child has lived for 9 months in its mother's womb, it begins to be born. The child is very much afraid and it cries. It has never been born before. For 9 months, it has been attached to its mother. It has been comfortable, confident, and unafraid. Then suddenly, it is separated from her. The warmth of the womb gives way to the coldness of the outside world. The ease of the friendly darkness becomes a glaring galaxy of light, and the umbilical cord is cut, and his mother seems gone. Then, beautifully, comfortingly, satisfyingly, it is at her breasts, drinking in security and happiness. Even so with us. For a space of time, we live on the earth, and even though life is sometimes hard on us, we cling to it. Then suddenly, we're being born again. We are leaving everything and everybody we know and going we know not where. But God is our Father and our Mother. He is waiting for us. He will hold both our hands and say, "You're very welcome. Come to my home and eat with me." The grave is another womb. Fear is the umbilical cord that keeps us from being born again. The Christians nodded in agreement. The coffin was lowered into the grave, and I invited the father, a white-haired elder, to take a fist of clay and scatter it on the coffin. He bent sorrowfully and picked a handful of red earth, and with great tenderness and dignity sprinkled it, saying, "Svaisere laquani," farewell, child. We finished the burial and had tea and bread. Then I left and went back to the mission. In the quiet of the evening, I could hear the mission tradesman hammering. He was assembling the beds in the new ward. Today again, I heard a newborn baby cry, the sound that comes so often from the new word. The Lord gives us the world, and the Lord takes it away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. He has made all of us Easter people. Words inspired by God. After Alfred had retired, on a regular basis, he and I would meet in my office out in Los Altos for lunch. And I really, really looked forward to these, not just because he provided sandwiches and sodas and brownies, but because he had a really brilliant mind. And we were both interested in the same topics. We were fascinated particularly at the interface between science and spirituality. So we had many, many great discussions over the years, until finally cancer and chemotherapy caught up with him, and then we weren't able to make those rendezvous anymore. But every Sunday, he'd be here. And when you come in at the back of the church, after a chemotherapy bout had ended, several weeks of chemotherapy, and his hair is growing back again, it would be white and fluffy and curly. And I was the only person that was allowed to touch it. I'd ruffle it. And I'd say, Alfred, it's like stroking the head of the Lamb of God. And the two of us would laugh at it. I missed those times with him, really missed him. And so today, we're dedicating this Eucharist, and I'm dedicating this homily to my friend Alfred Parra, who shuffled off his mortal coil at 11 p.m. on the night of March 27th in this year. And I want to just revisit some of the topics that we loved to talk about. So I'll revisit 3 of those topics, and then I'll add a consideration about Holy Week, which we're beginning today. So one of the topics that fascinated both of us was to try to figure out what we meant by God. And both of us agreed that the term God was kind of loaded with a whole lot of baggage that we didn't want. So we came up with a whole bunch of different names, the divine mind, source. But the one that we loved best was, we called it a meta-cosmic consciousness. That whatever God is, whatever that extraordinary intelligence is, it's way beyond even this cosmos of ours. So we didn't believe in pantheism, the belief system that God is simply the sum total of everything that exists. God is much more than that. We believe more in panentheism, that God is both the sum total of everything that exists and a lot more that we can say nothing about. Pantheism is to panentheism as the play Shakespeare, as the play Hamlet is to Shakespeare. There's a lot more to Shakespeare than his sonnets or his plays. And there's a lot more to God than manifest reality. So we settled on the term meta-cosmic consciousness. We figured that's a good description of what we're talking about here. And we figured out, how did this meta-cosmic consciousness, how did it formulate life? And we came to the conclusion that the stages look like this, that this meta-cosmic consciousness gives birth to love. And love gives birth to twins, and the twins are light and logos. And when light and logos dance, they bring all life forms into being. So we know from physics that all matter is frozen light. And we know that sound has an extraordinary ability to organize matter. So when light and sound, or music and matter dance together, you get all different kinds of life forms. You can take a simple tray, a tin tray, and scatter sand in it, and then play a musical instrument underneath it, and it'll create patterns in the sand. A very famous Japanese scientist, Masaru Emoto, demonstrated that when you play music in front of water, the crystallization process is very different depending on the kind of music you're playing. If you play heavy metal, you get one kind of crystallization. If you play Bach, you get a totally different kind of crystallization. So music or sound organizes matter. And different traditions will call this differently. Hinduism will call this Om, the sound of the dial tone of the universe. John's Gospel will call it the Logos, the Word of God. So when you get the Word of God playing with matter, when you get light and sound playing together, you get all these extraordinary life forms. That was the first idea we were wrestling with. A second one then was to look at, Alfred, who do you think that you are? And he said, well, I'll give you my answer and you give me your answer. So who do I think I am? Who do you think you are today? And we came to the conclusion that we can't be our bodies. So you look at whatever way you cut it, whether it's light and sound dancing form into being, or whether basically all life forms on the planet consist of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, basically those 4 elements. And if you trace minerals, or you look and say, well, it's all created from the 4 nucleotides, A, C, T, and G. Whatever way you cut it, how do you account for the extraordinary pluriformity of form that we see? These very same elements create elephants, and weasels, and daffodils, and mountains, and human beings. So we can't just be the raw stuff. There's some kind of an intelligence, some kind of organizing principle that takes the very same nucleotides or the same molecules of matter and create elephants out of it, or daffodils out of it, or human beings out of it. And in the case of any species sitting in our church right here today, look at all these different versions. Every single one of us is playing with the same elements, the same pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. But this man is making Bob Ullman out of it. This is Bernadette Hart is making it. This is Margaret Park's version of it. Every one of us, even though we're the same species, are making totally different versions of that. So there's this extraordinary intelligence. And we agreed we can't be our bodies. The lining of the stomach changes every 4 days. Every cell in your stomach lining is changed in 4 days. Your skin is changed every month. 50% of the dust in your home is dead skin cells. Your skeletal system changes every 6 months. And your entire 98% of the cells in your body change in a year cycle. At the end of 7 years, there's not a single cell in your body that was there before. So you keep replacing them. So how come then we get older? Because as we replace them, we're replacing them according to some kind of a disintegrating template or blueprint. It's like you're building a house, and at some stage, the construction guy spills coffee on the plans, and you can't read them properly anymore, and so you got a window where there wasn't supposed to be a window, or there's a door missing where there was supposed to be a door. And so as we replace this stuff, the blueprint is disintegrating, and that's part of the deal. That's what we sign up for. So who am I then? We came to the conclusion, I'm certainly not my body. And we'd quote this Hindu proverb, I have a body, but I'm not my body. I have emotions, but I'm not my emotions. I have an intellect, but I'm not my intelligence. I have a personality, but I'm not even my personality. The personality is simply the interface between essence and environment, between soul and circumstance. And so here's the notions we'd play around with it, that we are some of these things. So I remember before Alfred started coming out to Los Altos for these lunches, I used to go to a place called Fresh Choice, just on the intersection of El Camino and San Antonio. The building is still there, but it's not being used anymore. And I'm sitting there one day, and I'm eating a bowl of vegetable soup, and I scoop up a forkful, and there's a piece of broccoli on it. And I fell into a kind of a reverie, and I started thinking, I wonder how intelligent is a piece of broccoli? And I came to the conclusion that it has at least 3 different kinds of intelligence. There was a time on planet Earth when broccoli didn't exist as a life form. And some kind of creative intelligence brought it into being. So the first kind of intelligence it has is creative intelligence, something that brought it into being, from previous state. Then this particular piece of broccoli was in the ground, and it was nurturing itself through air and sun and water and wind. So I call that sustaining intelligence, the ability to achieve and maintain homeostasis. That's the second kind of intelligence. And then when it finally got chopped and dipped into my bowl of soup, and I'm consuming it, it's now going to become part of me. So it's now going to redistribute its molecular structure into a greater ecosystem, i.e. Seán. And so it's going to learn to think, and it's going to learn to speak with an Irish accent. And so there's a third kind of intelligence. I call it re-gifting intelligence. So there's the kind of, here we talk about when we say, who am I, who are you? Another great question we wrestled with then was, what is the journey of life, or what is the purpose or the mission of life? And we came to the conclusion that there are actually 5 great traumas in the typical life. And by life, I don't mean something that begins at birth and ends at death. I think the first great trauma is what I would call the launching pad. Souls who live forever, bite-sized bits of God who are eternal, who are not time-bound, that decide to incarnate. And so there's a launching pad where they start heading for some kind of a dimension or some kind of a planet where they're going to be incarnated in some fashion. That must be really, really frightening for a soul. A soul who was, infinite and completely great intelligence is now stuck inside. The second great trauma then is the actual docking process, where this soul, which is spaceless and timeless, and hugely intelligent, is now confined to this tiny little embryo or fetus inside in the mother's womb. That must be really, really frightening. But then we get used to it after a while. And now after 9 months there, we certainly get expelled, and we find ourselves trying to splunk out through a cave which is far too narrow to admit egress. It's really, really frightening on the child. So that's the third great, trauma in life. And then about 8 months into it, there's the development of the ego, the fourth great trauma. Because for the first 8 or 9 months, the child is totally convinced there's only a single organism, the mother-child complex, and I'm in charge. I shout, a breast appears. I'm cold, somebody cuddles me. And now at the age of about 8 months, I suddenly come to the realization I'm alone here. There's two parts to this equation, and all the power resides in the other, and she can abandon me if she chooses. So the evolution of the ego leads to all kinds of defense mechanisms to protect ourselves. And then the final one we think of is death. That death somehow is the final great trauma. In my opinion, it's the least of all the 5. But it's the one that somehow we seem to be most concerned about, because we get 60 or 70 or 80 years of our societies telling us, there's no beyond, or we have no idea what's going to happen. So I heard a lecture one time by a guy called Bernard Hesch, an astrophysicist. He was a lecturer here in Palo Alto. And he made a statement that really, really rocked me. And I began thinking about it. He said, by limiting infinite possibilities, we create finite realities. By limiting infinite possibilities, we create finite realities. So in other words, we're these infinite beings, but if we're going to incarnate, we won't have the equipment to grok that. We'll have to operate with this little 3-pound wetware computer that we carry between our ears to try to understand, incarnation. We can't do it. And so we have to limit completely the unlimited possibilities down to unlimited reality. And the best example I can think of, I want you to imagine that we're watching a movie up on the screen there, and all the lights are out, and there's a projection back up there. And we're watching an old Charlie Chaplin movie in black and white, and it's onto the screen, just black and white figures. What we do is we're under the illusion that the pictures are only the black pieces. So Charlie Chaplin is black, so light is going through, part of the light occluded, and the occluded light creates the impression of a Charlie Chaplin or other figures dancing across the screen. So what you're actually watching is the part that's not there. And what you're actually ignoring is the part that is there. What is there is light. And the places where the light can't get through, that's what you're watching, and you say, oh, that's Charlie Chaplin. And of course it's not. It's just the absence of light in the Charlie Chaplin-shaped hole. So we constantly reverse background and foreground. We really think what appears to be real isn't real, and what appears to be made up is real. So we think that this world is really real. And it's real in the sense that when we're incarnated, we experience this. But this is not our reality. This is merely the background to who we really are. Who we really are is the light of God. So these are the kinds of discussions we'd have. We would talk then about what are we doing there? How do we come here? And we talk about the notion of a preconception contract, that souls, in a disincarnate form or a pre-incarnated form, they make agreements with each other to come down as a group, to create a drama which affords each soul the optimal opportunity for developing whatever virtues they want to develop, whether it's courage in a lifetime, or compassion, or patience, or forgiveness, or whatever it is. And we choose our circumstances. We choose all the significant people in our lives. We're not just born happenstance to a family. We choose our parents, our siblings, our friends. We even choose our enemies, the people who are going to really test us. We choose the era into which we want to be born. We choose the culture. We choose the timing of it. We choose the virtues and the gifts we're coming to give to the world. And we choose the issues that we're going to work on. And most importantly of all, perhaps at some stage, we choose our exit strategy. We choose the ways in which we're going to end the incarnation. And I think the soul chooses 3 or 4 possibilities, and it just depends on how much progress the individual has made in an incarnated form before the soul says, okay, I think we can let go at this stage. So we may pass up the first exit or the second exit. At some stage, the soul is saying, okay, we've learned as much as we can learn in this incarnation, let's call it quits. And then we shuffle off this mortal coil. And the fourth thing I wanted, these were the stuff that Alfred and I talked about nonstop. And then the fourth point, very briefly, I want to make is this. We're entering Holy Week. It begins today, Palm Sunday, with the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem. And if you were to take any one week in the calendar that encapsulates or is the archetype for the life journey, this would be it. So in some senses, Palm Sunday represents the joy and the celebration of the Messiah arriving. That's the birth of every child, or hopefully the birth of every child. At least the birth of most children. That most children come into the world and everybody is really excited and joyful and celebratory. That's celebrated by Palm Sunday. Everybody is really happy. The mother has given birth. Mother and child are healthy, thank God. We're delighted. We're bringing balloons and goodies to the mother. So that's Palm Sunday. But then there's Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, which represents, the trajectory of life, the vicissitudes and the difficulties and the triumphs and the roller coaster of living 60 or 70 or 80 years. Every one of us experiences that. So Monday through Thursday are the archetype of what happens in between. And then Friday, we celebrate Good Friday, our death. And every one of us is crucified in some way. Alfred was crucified by cancer and by chemotherapy. That was his cross that he bore so patiently and so lovingly. So Good Friday becomes the celebration, the archetype of the exit. And then Saturday becomes the archetype of the grieving and the mourning. He's gone. The death is finished, the dying is finished, the pain is finished, but the hole in the heart is huge. So Saturday represents that longing and that missing and that grieving and bereaved. But then comes Sunday. Next Sunday, Easter Sunday, it is the resurrection. The realization that Alfred has regained his true nature. He played a role in a drama for a period of time. He accomplished it beautifully, in my opinion, from what I know of him, really, really beautifully. And now he's exited stage left, awaiting the rest of us to finish the rest of the play and go be with him. And so I would say that the life, Alfred's life is, a beautiful archetype of Holy Week. And I'm finished with, there's a great Irish blessing that we say when somebody extraordinary has passed. We say, Yesh lov de grev anam usul. On the right hand of God, may his noble soul always dwell.